John Sampson grew up under a dome while his father worked in the mines, mining ore, while he looked out into the night sky and kind of saw solar space and the possibility that it was intertwined. Uh, Everything in his world was telling him his future was beneath the surface. It was underground. He wanted to go one way. And much like the center of gravity in Mars, it was pulling him into the dirt, into the red sand itself.
Listen to you, you poet.
I know. And how he goes to a school that is ran by the mining corporations. With those corporations, with their money, they create the next generation of miners. And he doesn't quite fit in there. And maybe there's a teacher there that kind of sees that. There's a teacher that also never quite fit in. And John Sampson feels trapped. Now, he finds his escape through enlisting into the ICA uh, and goes to fight in the Titan conflict. But before that, during that period of high school where he's so trapped, is the same period where they discover that there's other life out there, that Titan is a giant frozen supercomputer. And I'm curious about the social ramifications of that on working class miners. How do working class miners receive that knowledge? Right. That's like if someone could prove that the moon was made of cheese. My first thought is that since these miners are Martian nationalists, the difference between a nationalist and a patriot that we've discussed on this program is a patriot loves his country and wants it to be the best it can be. A nationalist knows his country is the best and there's no room for improvement, so it's a blind worship of it. And so they blindly worship Mars, and they blindly worship their ancestry, and they romanticize the United States. I love the United States, but there's room for improvement. That's
Mm.
the difference. And my first thought is that since tensions have been rising between the Martians and the Titans for years at this point, through the 2080s, like you said, or 2380s, right?
2280s.
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 And like you said, a lot of people are going to think it's just a Titan trick.
Mm-hmm.
It's fake
Makes
news.
sense.
Um,
Yeah.
or I think some people too will look at it as almost um, a way to distract people from the anxieties of artificial intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
How how some, I mean, myself included, feel inadequate in the face of artificial intelligence and wonder what's going to happen if and when their job goes away. And I think that'll be a part of the conversation there. And I think that will probably be a factor of it too, right? Like you'll have a news uh apparatus. You'll have some of it will be propaganda. Some people will have an idealized version of things and they'll say, oh, well, this is the truth and we want to report the truth and we're news people. And other people will say, I'm getting the check from the corporation and I'm happy. Some people want a two-dimensional version of the world that is easy to digest because they don't really have the bandwidth to look inward and discover how many angels dance on the head of a pin. Like, people who
Mm-hmm.
work in mines, people with hard, laborious jobs, they're busy and they're tired. And
Yeah, there was a specific conversation I had with my mom and stepdad several years back. This is when I was still at IUPUI, still an undergrad, politically idealistic. And I remember I was sort of arguing with them, not really arguing, maybe debating or whatever one night. And my mom pointed out, honey, or whatever she said, honey, we it's not that we don't care about political issues. It's just that we have so much going on that we don't have the time to be involved in all of this stuff that's going on, whether it's the migrant crisis, whether it's whatever it was back 8 years ago
Yeah.
or so. It was like the immigrants coming from Syria or or anything like that, stuff like that. It's
Well,
just there's too much.
you were a young, well-educated man, and you were kind of seeing, you were exploring ideas.
Mhm.
And so yeah, that's very common in young men. And that uh that could be a good place to draw inspiration from for the John Sampson story,
Mhm.
where, he, like, maybe his father, uh like, maybe the life John Sampson grows up in is better just because there's more food. Maybe food's consistent and the lights stay on, and no one wonders where they're going to live next week, right? And maybe John Sampson's father says, hey, all the kids survived past age 5. We're doing pretty good. you know
I
like,
don't think it would be that bad, but
but
I
you
get
get
what you mean.
you get what I'm
Yes, I get
saying.
what you mean. Yeah, because you have to understand that on Mars, there would definitely be hardships. There would probably, especially by 200 or 200 to 250 years into the colonization process, there would probably be enough stability built in that you wouldn't have like you know or even any percentage points, let alone a large percentage point of the children dying before they reach maturity. It's
Okay.
not like the frontier west, but I get what you mean. There would be other types of hardship for sure.
Yeah. And John Sampson's father looks at things. Now, John Sampson's father is a guy who sacrificed his body for his family and the mine. And
Mm-hmm.
he has to believe in the mine, right? Because otherwise, what the fuck was the point? What was I doing? So you have to tell yourself a
Yeah.
story that I did this. This is what men do. And I've always believed, to a certain extent, yes, men provide, they protect, and they sacrifice. However, there's a fourth key element to that, and it's sustainability. You have to do it on a way that you can do this for the long term, because otherwise
Mm-hmm.
you're crippled when you're 50 and you're dead when you're 60, you know.
Yeah.
And
Because that's the thing. John Sampson's father, if I'm understanding your bent correctly, John Sampson's father, he thinks the status quo is good enough.
yes,
Because he has to because he sacrificed so much for it. He thinks the status quo is good enough. He thinks incremental change is good enough if change at all.
yeah,
Whereas John coming up at an age is at that age where he thinks, oh, maybe we can try and do things differently.
yeah,
Bring about change, quickly, that sort of thing. It's a classic story. And the way that John tries to buy his ticket into that rapid change is by leaving home. And it just so happens that right at the time when he's trying to make his decision of how to leave home, oh, the Titan Pact launches a sneak attack on Mars, which draws Mars into war, and he decides to go join the Spacer Corps.
yeah. And with that status quo that John has spent his life, John Sampson's father has spent his life
Mm-hmm.
sacrificing for, because their difference of opinion is going to be the fact that John Sampson's father uh gives the status quo the benefit of the doubt at all times, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not that his father's a bad guy. He's not. His father looks around and says, "Oh, all of the kids are fed. They've got nice clothes. The lights turn on. We own the house." He never, his John Sampson's grandfather never owned a house. But John Sampson's father, by God, he fucking owns a house. A good man who worked hard and gave enough space, but he had to sacrifice himself, devote it to the status quo. And he sees that the status quo has done so much for him, has made things so much better. And so why wouldn't he give it the benefit of the doubt? But on the flip side, with John Sampson, seeing his father gave so much margin in their lives, gave him the ability, the bandwidth to question the status quo to see what they can make better.
Look at, say, the mid, where you've got guys in their 40s and 50s who fought in World War II, maybe Korea, whatever, who were part of the greatest generation, what have you, who have grown into middle age and beyond, living off the status quo, not and with a negative connotation, but living off the status quo that they helped to build, they helped to fight for, they helped to construct through the late 40s through the 50s and so on. And their kids are reaching maturity and either going off to fight in Vietnam or going to college, and in either case, starting to question the status quo and question, well, can things be different? And that's
Yeah.
where a lot of the social upheaval in the 60s comes from,
Yeah.
the
And
generational divide.
yeah. And in
Because
this,
you look at a lot of guys who went and fought in Vietnam and they came back and they joined VIVA, or whatever, Vietnam Veterans Against the War,
mm,
you know,
yeah.
and protested the war that they had fought in, burned their own medals and stuff like that, threw their
Yeah.
medals on trash heaps. So I'm not necessarily saying John Sampson is going to be that level of radical or radical at all, but
But you're
it's that kind of groundswell of, oh, we're going to go off to join the ICA because Mars needs us, but at the same time we're questioning the sort of status quo that has led to this in the first place. So
yeah,
there's a kind of, yeah.
you're drawing the parallels between that and
Mm-hmm.
how perhaps John Sampson's father, his generation, did so much and they changed so much together. And he's probably a union man too.
Yeah.
And they did all of that together, and he sees change of the status quo through the big organization that's the mining union. And so, like, you wouldn't, one man doesn't change the world. Collective bargaining, collective action changed the world, right? And no one's wrong in that equation. It's just that's the world that John Sampson's father has seen. And you don't go off and fight in the wars, you dig in the mine, you know. And I wonder if John Sampson's father uh is against him joining the ICA. What do you think?
Oh, that's another good question. I think he'd probably be conflicted, honestly.
Yeah.
As on the one hand, the ICA is the status quo.
Yeah.
Mars would be a superpower, and Mars knows that riding the coattails of big boy on the block, which is basically the UN, the European Union, whatever you want to call it, that organizes all of solar space, at least in theory, is the way to do that. It's like if the United States at the turn of the 20th century or in the middle of the 20th century was trying to organize the rest of the world around itself and had this had the League of Nations or the United Nations, assuming either one of those actually worked, which the first one didn't really work at all. The second one works some of the time, thankfully. But you get what I'm saying. It's like the ICA represents the status quo. The ICA is a safe bet. It's not. It's patriotism, because Mars is part of the ICA. Going to fight for the ICA, going to fight for Mars when Mars is attacked by the Titan Pact. That's the safe bet. But at the same time, I think John Sampson's father would understand, even as maybe socially conservative as he might be, or socially conservative, but also conservative sort of like idealistically.
Hmm.
There's different types of conservatism. There's social conservatism, there's physical conservatism. There's also like ideological conservatism, where you're like, or where you're basically you're conservative in what you're willing to believe in.
They don't want things. They think things work great now, so why change it?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, and he's afraid of letting his son go off to fight in a war. Who wouldn't be?
that's perfect because okay, there you go. Because John Sampson's father wasn't a military guy. They don't come from military people. They come from like iron miners. And so he
Yeah.
doesn't really have a firsthand context of the war. He just knows he should
Mhm.
be afraid for his boy, and he's right. And and I love the idea as we're talking about this, there's there's a conflict where John Sampson's father's like, you should stay, and the thing that men do is they mine into the dirt, and but really what's going on is he's just scared.
Yeah.
But he doesn't really have the tools in his toolbox to say, son, I love you. I respect what you're doing. This terrifies me to no end. You know, that's, he's probably
Yeah,
not
because
the,
The Titan Pact has said they want to kill every Martian soldier they can get their hands on. You
yes.
know, he understands what that means. He may not be well educated. He may not be very worldly, but he's a man of the earth, or should we say of the Mars,
Yeah.
of the regolith. But he understands what war means, just
Yeah.
through sort of cultural osmosis. The most there's obviously a certain amount of nationalism that can make people, thump their chests for war, especially the sort of people who don't actually have to go fight. But usually, the sort of people whose children are going off to fight war, they have some sort of a basic understanding of what that means because they know, oh, this child that I raised and love and is my legacy couldn't might come back in a box or might come back missing limbs or worse.
Yeah. Or maybe they're
You know?
they're they're not who they were when they left.
Yeah,
You know,
exactly.
you become somebody. Sometimes people come home and no one recognizes them. And go about me for a second. I'm lucky in that I stayed myself, you know. Like, I mean, I grew and changed and everything, but I never had some people did not have a good time adjusting home. But anyway,
There's that line that I always come back to from the outlaw Josie Wales. Have you ever heard of that movie? I
yes.
probably told you about it. There's a line at the end of the outlaw Josie Wales where Josie is talking to God, what's the guy's name? He played Dean Wormer in National Lampoon's Animal House, but I can't remember the actor's name, John Warner or something like that.
Okay.
Um, but he plays the character who rode with Josie during the Civil War as one of like the Southern Raiders or whatever, and he's like helping the Union track him down because now after the war he's a fugitive. And after Josie has killed all of the Union soldiers who are trying to kill him, who incidentally are the same group of Union soldiers who killed his family as like bushwhackers, um, he's like confronted by this guy, and they're like, who's basically about to let him go, and they're having this last conversation. And I can't remember what the other guy says, but Josie, Clint Eastwood's character says something that has always stuck with me because he says it the way only Clint Eastwood can. He says, "We all died a little bit in that war."
Yeah. Anyway, um, so so John Sampson goes off to war. Another theme I want to explore here is you've got the anxieties of artificial intelligence encroaching on them.
Mm-hmm.
And the company creating better, stronger, faster mining machines that require a lot fewer and fewer humans, and the unions fighting that and requiring restrictions and stuff, and maybe there can be strikes going on or something, or maybe there were strikes going on, and that John's father got injured at a strike. Who knows? And but another representation of artificial intelligence are the Zorns. Now, at this point, um, they're not even called Zards, right?
Nope, you just called artificials. They haven't started. They haven't come to the. They haven't come to the point of calling themselves Zards yet.
But they're
Because
they're sentient creatures.
yes, they are sentient. They're sentient human-like beings. Um, some of them may even be non-human-like beings. And there's certain artificials that aren't designed to be humanoid. They're rarer because the general feeling I have is that there would be kind of like a memorandum or just like a general that artificials should look at least mostly human.
Mm.
so that humans can identify with them and not be creeped out by them, because it's the uncanny valley. Look at robots like that. What is it, Sophia or something like that? The robot that's supposed to look like a human. When it doesn't look exactly like a human, it freaks us the fuck out. So
Exactly.
having a robot, having something that's sentient, that's not born, is bad enough. You at least want it to look human so you can at least identify with it and empathize with it as much as possible. If you have something that's not human, that's sentient, that's not born naturally, and it like looks like a giant crab that talks, that's going to freak you out. So those things are more their production is more curtailed. So yeah, but yes, they are mostly sentient humanoid beings.
That's really brilliant. And what I want to explore is in the Mars Titan War, I had this thought where
Mm-hmm.
John Sampson enlists and 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 the ICA is experimenting with pairing soldiers with artificials, right?
Mm-hmm.
And but John Sampson also grew up in an entire environment that around a bunch of Union folks that had nothing but hatred and disdain for artificials.
Mm-hmm.
And granted, John Sampson was always kind of a more open-minded dude, and he never had a reason to disagree with any of it, but he never quite understood it, right? Like
Yeah.
you grow up in this environment, people say, "Oh, well, this group over here is bad." You've never met that group. You have no idea what they're about. But like everyone else says they're bad, but you're like, "Are they?" Well, I mean, probably not, but I don't know. I'm not it's he
You don't
has
really buy into it, but you don't really discount it either.
yeah,
It's just kind of an opinion that you're inundated with. So maybe you internalize it a little bit, but you never think about it too much.
exactly, you know, um but when he enlists, they have kind of exposures to artificials and stuff. And I love the idea of throughout the Mars Titan War, um, he has an artificial. We used to call them battle buddies in the army,
Mhm.
right? He has an artificial battle buddy. I don't know why he does. Maybe it's experimental program. Maybe it's you know
Maybe he has a duty where he works with artificial, because I'm not. Here's my thinking. Um, Artificials wouldn't probably be like paired up directly
okay.
with infantry soldiers and stuff like that. But infantry spacers, that is, that's a weird term, infantry spacer. Um, but because I'm thinking the military would probably be segregated. And again, it'd be segregated for much of the same reason of what we talked about just a second ago, which is uncanny valley. Because if you have artificials working too close in concert with humans, the humans might get, any human who has, even because again, it's the old it's an argument, might not necessarily hold water, but it doesn't have to hold water. It has to. People have to think that it holds water. It's the argument about why we shouldn't have gay soldiers. It's the argument about why we shouldn't have transgender soldiers. It doesn't. The argument is bullshit. But if the commanders and politicians who make the rules think it's not bullshit, then it's going to be enforced anyway. So if people think, oh well, what if our spacers are prejudiced against these artificials and they might not rush to their aid fast enough in the event of battle, they might fear going to them for support in the event of battle. That's going to cause segregation right there. That. Even if it's a weak sauce argument, it's enough of an argument to give them a reason to segregate them. But that doesn't mean they wouldn't interact, because you may remember. I think we ended up cutting this part out in one of the drafts, but in one of the old versions of spacers, there was like an artificial, or Zarn, or whatever I was calling them at the time. There was like an artificial like janitor on one of the ships where Cam Powell was stationed, and it was like getting bullied by some of the other spacers, and like the sergeant, like Cameron Powell, and the sergeant had to break it up because they were like picking on this Zarn, because they're like, oh well, you're just like the things the Martians, which is at that point it wasn't the Martians, are sitting at us, in wave attacks. Why should we trust you? And there'd probably be similar things happening in the ICA, because they use Zarn or artificial they use artificial like combat soldiers or combat forces, and maybe like assistants and things like that, ammunition carriers, even drivers. It could be stuff like that. Maybe like the driver of his armored personnel carrier is an artificial, like non-combat soldier or something. Sort of like how in Aliens, like one of the classic techs for military sci-fi, the driver of the APC is an artificial person, Bishop,
So
who's unarmed.
you're thinking that okay. You're thinking that he regularly interacts with an artificial and learns to trust artificials by trusting this guy.
Mm-hmm.
And do you want John Sampson's father or John Sampson to be a medic? I mean, I could write medics because I was one. So like you could have like a whole like lineage of medics and like we could just mine the fuck out of that, but we don't have to either.
Well,
That's
because I mean, the only other medic we've got Tommy Sampson, who I believe is supposed to be some sort of medic, isn't he?
Mhm.
And we've got, and again, people could probably get on our case for having this recurring theme of medics in the Spacer Corps, but who cares? Medics make for good stories because they interact with lots of different spacers. They see combat, especially in this day and age and going forward, and it's a rich story environment. So anyone who would fault us for having two or three characters same MOS or whatever that would be called in the future, just fuck them. They'll have to deal with it. They can read. They can read it and like it.
Sounds good. And okay, so John Sampson, who becomes a medic in the ICA during the Mars Titan War, learns to trust they're going to have artificials embedded in the medic platoon who do a lot of like the grunt work, the litter stretch carries, the stuff like that. You know,
Bingo.
um, they'll set up the aid station.
Mhm.
They'll drive the ambulances, whatever.
Yeah, because that's what artificials do. Artificials are created to do work. That's literally what they're meant for. A lot of the pushback against artificials in the mining towns example, for example, is them coming in to replace humans to do menial work because they're meant to be expendable labor.
Okay, John Sampson works on an ambulance and has an artificial driver.
Sounds good.
That simple. And because that means that they're going to be paired up. That means that they're going to have a reason to be paired up. And that's good. And I know this isn't giving away the end of the book because we haven't written the book yet.
Mhm.
But I love because I know at the end of it, okay, a big part of what the Titan Pack does is they use waves of artificials to kill ICA troops.
Mhm.
And because there's an artificial guy who's, you know, that the Titan Pact has kind of,
An AI,
an AI that
not
the
an artificial, like an AI program, basically like I don't know what you how you would analogize it, but it's sort of like
it's Skynet.
EE. It's Skynet, basically. Yeah, it's a big military logistics and planning program that
Yeah,
they use to run their military effort. The Titan Pack uses to plan their military effort after especially more, when they start using it more and more after they start losing.
exactly.
And basically doesn't give a shit about human life. So it's basically telling them, oh, throw wave after wave of artificials and human at the ICA, drop nukes on them if you want to. It doesn't matter. It's basically the classic story. It's an AI that's been told to win the war at any cost, and it takes that literally.
Yeah,
It's I think we talked about this, probably again a couple years ago even now. The classic example is the Grey Goose story. You create an artificial intelligence and tell it to maximize paperclip production, and the way it does that is by turning all life on Earth into paperclips using nanomaterials. You know,
yeah, I remember
so
that.
you tell Horus AI to win the war, and it says, okay, I'm going to win the war. I'm going to drop an antimatter bomb on Phobos and turn it into a massive asteroid cluster that's going to fall on Mars. I'm going to drop nukes on Titan, on our own planet, on our own world, to try and curtail the ICA advance across Titan. It basically scorched Earth tactics.
And that brings me to uh this ending I have in mind
Mm-hmm.
where, and that'll take us into kind of a running theme throughout the Killing Fields of Titan,
Mm-hmm.
which will cover three generations of the Sampson family, where at the end of the book, I have this image in my head where John Sampson and his artificial companion are trying to stop the destruction of Phobos so it doesn't kill everybody on Mars. And the artificial, in a blink of an eye, realizes we can't stop this. And the only person I can really save is John Sampson right now. And what the artificial does is he, puts John Sampson in an escape pod, whatever, whatever. And the artificial does something to the explosions where it says, oh, if we do X instead of Y, we just lose Phobos. We don't lose Mars.
Mm-hmm.
But the artificial sacrifices himself, and that teaches John Sampson, oh my God, they're human just like we are. They're people. He sees, I mean, he knew they were people, but like that solidified it. And I want to dig into that even deeper because I see that solidification, that understanding be passed down through three generations of men. Because
Mm-hmm.
like I see Tommy Sampson falling in love. He falls in love with an artificial woman. And I don't know if they have a human child. Maybe there's a mix. I don't know. Right.
Well,
And
that's the thing. They can't have children together,
they
but
raise
they
a
can
child.
adopt a kid.
They raise a child somehow. Right. And but what I really like is this idea of how John Sampson grew up in a world that hated artificials and would kill them for that a second thought. Tommy Sampson was raised by a man who saw the error of his ways and married an artificial woman, right? Was sort of the was sort of the most positive version of that. Their kid grew up after the uprising
I was about to say that's right when the uprising happens.
and joins the uprising, right? Because he becomes radicalized in a whole different way. The pendulum over three generations, the pendulum has swung from fuck robots to fuck humans. What do you
I've
think?
got an idea for you.
What you
I've
got?
got an idea for you. What if, and I'm trying to think how we can make this work because I don't want to poo-poo on your idea of having Tommy Sampson marry a robot girl. What if Tommy Sampson married a regular girl, had a regular kid that grows up to fight in the Frontier War, but then they got divorced or whatever, and he ended up like dating an artificial, and they adopted like an orphaned artificial kid because there are artificial children. They don't really age. They don't age in the normal sense that humans do because it's kind of like Haley Joel Osment in AI. It's like an artificial kid who stays an artificial kid, but because of or like teenager or whatever. And then when the uprising happens, the two kids are put at odds with each other because one of them is a Zarin and the other one's a human.
Well, let me ask you this. What are your thoughts on him marrying an artificial woman?
Fine, I'm fine with it. I don't, I don't know how the kid joins the uprising because the kid isn't a Zarin. At least not that. I suppose they could adopt a Zarin, like I said.
Maybe they adopt Zarn. Maybe they have a
Maybe
kid.
his wife joins the uprising.
Well, his kid's gonna see himself as Zarn. Maybe there's a section of being a Zarn that encompasses more than artificial or organic. It becomes a cultural aspect where the boy says, "Oh, well, my mom's a Zarn, and so that makes me part Zarn as well." That's like that would be like, that would be like if I adopted a kid who came from a different racial background than me. Well, then I would have a connection to that racial background via my adopted child. And so that
Hmm.
racial background, that culture, Hispanic, African American, whichever, would be, I would have a duty to understand that culture and I would feel
Hmm.
a part of it. I would feel a deep connection to it through my adopted child. But I see maybe in the frontier war, because you're going to have humans on the side against you're going to have humans on the side of the Czars. Like you're going to have some humans that are going to believe in the cause and believe to
Yes,
do
because
their part.
in the frontier wars, you have humans fighting humans. You have the ICA fighting the Alliance. But about 8 years into the frontier wars, the Zarns enter the war on the side of the Alliance. So you've got Zarns and humans fighting other humans.
So Tommy Sampson's kid joins the Alliance because he sees them as the good guys because the ICA persecutes robots.